Hashtag glow from your face. Something I never say in between.
And welcome again to the chat. As you know, we're in the middle of the Spring Carnival and we've got a fair few internationals here. But for those of you who love international racing and you watch the NBC coverage, racing TV coverage or anything like that, you'll know my next guest. And joining me is Nick Luck. G'day, Nick. How are you?
Hi, Ben. Great to see you. I love winks over your left shoulder and Zaki on your cap there, hedging your bets. That's what I like to see.
Yeah, thanks very much. I love anything to do with the Cox Plate. The Cox Plate is my favourite race day here in Australia. Just first of all, from a UK and more of an international perspective, because you work in international racing media as well, how high regard is Australian racing held in your opinion?
I think much higher regard now than perhaps it ever has been. I think the respect for the calibre of competition is one thing, and I know that was much debated during the Winks run. Well, how good are these horses that she's actually beating? But I think people have become a bit smarter and a bit more nuanced and a bit more appreciative of the strength of the top level of racing in Australia. I think there's great respect for the way that racing is administered. Obviously, huge envy at the purses, the prize money, and I think a real warmth towards the fandom as we see it from afar in Australia. Yes, there are racing fans here. Yes, there are racing fans in the United States and all over the world. And we know that Japan takes it to a whole different level. But I think from what I can see when I watch your coverage, when I talk to people like you, the real passion, enthusiasm and fandom for the sport is entirely authentic still in the major racing centres in Australia. And I love that.
And we've had quite a few horses over the years that are from the UK come here. And like their turnaround in form has been amazing. Like look at Zaki, for example, which I'm wearing today.
Yeah.
What do you put that down to? And I ask you that because here we don't know what causes that turnaround in form because we train differently to UK.
So this has engendered one of these typical debates which polarizes people and is perfect for social media. And on one level, it's great because, of course, it increases interest in the sport and it increases the chat. But the truth of it is, it's probably a little bit of the middle distance racing in Australia is a little less competitive than the best middle distance racing in Europe. I don't think anyone's going to massively argue with that. It's probably a combination of that and the fact that the circumstances of racing and training in Australia is going to be better suited to some horses than the racing and training in the UK. I mean, if you take a horse like Zaki, for example, there's no doubt that his previous connections, whilst they found out that he was a pretty good horse, they probably never got his setup exactly right. They were never quite sure what his ideal distance was. And he was a horse who started looking a little bit reluctant in his races. His old head had come up at the end of his races and you'd think, well, this horse has got more to offer. So it's not as though if you were watching him closely over the last few years, you've suddenly thought, well, here's a horse who was not much caught. All he was just a minor stakes horse and he suddenly turned into a world champion. The truth, as always with these things, is somewhere in the middle. He was a horse who was kind of a Group 2 horse probably that wasn't fulfilling his potential in the UK. Now his potential's been unlocked and the competition's slightly less deep and he's on a roll. So, it's got to be the right horse, the right set of circumstances. And clearly Annabelle Neasham's done an absolutely brilliant job with him as well. But he's a horse who, he's probably had a few issues. And I think sitting in a 200 box yard in Newmarket doing basically the same thing every day is not a regime that necessarily suited him. And I think he's probably better suited to the regime that he's in now.
One of my favourite things I love to watch because I get them on YouTube here in Australia is your Luck on Sunday interviews. And my favourite one is probably from 2018 when you spoke with Sheikh Farhad, and he was very vocal about the inequities when it comes to prize money in the UK. And for example, our Saturday races here, minimum we're worth $100,000, whereas there you're racing for $2,000 in a race on Saturdays. Do you feel the BHA has done enough since 2018 to address those inequities?
Well, the BHA tries, but the problem is that the BHA is only really an arbiter here. It doesn't sort of hold power entirely. So the way that the British horse racing is structured, without wishing to bore everybody in Australia as much as I bore everyone in Britain about this, but it's a tripartite structure between the race courses, a slightly bizarre group that probably needs reformation called the Horsemen's Group, which is a conglomerate of the owners, the trainers, the breeders, the jockeys, the stable staff, and they've all got to agree in order for their point of view to go forward. And then the BHA is the third part of that tripartite structure. And the BHA is there as a regulator and a governor, but it is there at the behest and at the cost of its key stakeholders. So it's not necessarily in a position whereby it can just crack the whip and say, right, we're going to do this, we're going to spend that, we're going to have these fixtures. It requires all these complex moving parts to work together. And that it's so hard in horse racing, as you know. I mean, you see interstate disagreements all the time about policy. But in some senses, Racing Victoria and New South Wales can operate discreetly from one another. But I've seen correspondents in Australia bemoan the fact that there isn't the kind of cooperation between them that there ought to be. Well, here in the UK, yes, we are under one governing body, but within that is a complex structure that all needs to hold together in order for anything to get done properly. And fixtures and funding is clearly an issue that doesn't go away.
I interviewed the bloodstock agent, UK-based guy. You may know him, Johnny McKeever, a couple of months ago, and Johnny was quite direct in saying another issue also is the fact that it's still viewed in some ways over there as a rich man's sport, and ownership isn't exactly very egalitarian. Whereas here, all kinds of people can own horses. You could have the candlestick maker, the baker, versus the multi-millionaire. It doesn't seem like that in the UK.
Yeah, and I think that's because it's more sort of culturally ingrained in Australia that anybody can own a bit of a racehorse. Yeah. And that they genuinely own a part of that racehorse as well. So my daughter just coming in to join us.
That's okay.
And anyone can own that part of a racehorse as well. So I think until that sort of cultural barrier is breached in the UK, we'll be slightly on the back foot here. Yes, there have been incredibly successful syndicates that have done extraordinarily well, but is that quite the same? Yes, people are quite happy here for small money to subscribe to a club or a mass syndicate, but they've got to feel enfranchised. They've got to feel like they own the horse. They've got to feel like they're involved and included, not just in that horse, but in the sport as a whole. And I'm not sure we're quite there yet.
And there's been a lack of international runners here for the Spring Carnival this year, and one of the main reasons has been because of the scans, etc. they have to do. I know Charlie Fellows, for example, has been quite vocal, and as a result, he retired one of his Prince of a Run, who I was lucky to meet when it won the Geelong Cup, and I got a photo with it, and he retired it, and he said, "No, I'm not coming." Aidan O'Brien's been quite vocal. What's the UK perspective on that? Because here it certainly has attracted a bit of debate with regards to the scans and that kind of thing.
I know. Well, listen, I've just published a podcast this morning. I pressed the send just before I logged on with you, Ben, which is entitled "Are Vets Derailing Australia's Biggest Races?" Because it's happened again this morning. With Gold Trip, David Eustace and Kieran Maher's horse, and Damien Oliver. I mean, you'll know this. I don't have to tell you, but I'm looking at it from my perspective. Damien Oliver's come out and said, "Look, I feel the horse is fine," and I've ridden a lot of international horses who I have had my concerns about. Not this one. I think this is just the way he is. And David Eustace saying to me this morning, "Well, what am I supposed to do with him? I mean, this horse isn't going to change in 2 days. We've had all the scans done." But here's the thing. They'd done all the scans. They'd done all the scintigraphy. They'd done all the checks. They'd had him vetted from top to toe and nose to tail before he came to Australia. And this is the horse they got. This is the horse they're still working with. Yet the vet's saying you can't run in the Cox Plate. And the horse is an entry in the Melbourne Cup. Well, if he can't run in the Cox Plate, he's sure as damn it not going to be able to run in the Cup. So I think this sort of narrative feeding back here is going to only enhance the notion that it's going to become borderline impossible to run a horse in these races. I know Joseph O'Brien's got State of Rest there. A young horse probably doesn't have the same wear and tear of your average 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old that you might be wanting to bring out to the carnival. I think that's the point. Maybe the effect of this will be that people are only willing to send horses at the beginning of their careers, or they're only willing to sell horses privately to Australians to go out and race for Australian connections. You've got to think that whether you believe it's right or wrong, and everyone can understand the reasoning behind it, and everyone wants to preserve these races, because I understand what kind of threat that they're under from a huge section of the population in Australia. But you can't help but thinking it's going to have a significantly detrimental effect on the international participation of these marquee races, and it's such a shame.
Similar rules then, like let's say, for example, if Aussies want to bring a horse over to the UK for Royal Ascot, or like, for example, UK horses going to America or going to Saudi Arabia for the Saudi Cup, how strict are the regulations? Are they similar to what we're talking about or not?
I mean, there are stringent regulations in some parts of the world when you take horses to race there. I mean, Hong Kong would be the most obvious example of where you have to pass quite significant veterinary checks. For some of the bigger festivals in the UK, particularly the jumps festivals, obviously, because that level of risk is greater. The Aintree Grand National Meeting and the Cheltenham Festival, there are trot-ups. So that is a relatively recent addition. But in the years they've been doing those, I've not heard too many complaints. You think about how many horses run at those two festivals, and the age of those horses as well. You're talking horses up to 11 or 12 years old who've had maybe 6-7 seasons racing over jumps. I've not heard too many disgruntled connections if a horse has had to be withdrawn. And I think part of the reason for that is that the horsemen and women are involved in the process from a much earlier stage. So it's not as though they can just train this horse normally up to the race and arbitrarily a vet says, I don't like the way that's moving, out. It's more if a trainer thinks a horse moves in a slightly unconventional or unorthodox way, or has had some sort of small issues, as long as the dialogue exists between that trainer and owner and the veterinary officials, that dialogue can start way before the meet, and they can continue to monitor that horse and look for relative changes in that horse's gait or behavior, rather than coming in blind and saying, well, I don't care what that horse is like all the time. This is what I'm going to say now. I think there has to be a collaborative process between veterinarians and connections if you're going to make this work in the long term.
You'll be heading over to the States soon for the Breeders' Cup. Can Essential Quality do it? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think he's definitely the clubhouse leader going into the Breeders' Cup Classic. He's got the perfect blend of class and stamina. The one real blip on it's not really a blip. He ran very well when he was fourth in the Kentucky Derby in a race that's worked out really well. He had the worst trip of the leading players that day. He was forced to tip out wide. He raced on the wrong lead most of the way around, and he just didn't really seem comfortable for whatever reason. The rest of his career has been marked by solid achievement, but also great tenacity. And I think he'll need both those in what is a stellar edition of this race. He will keep galloping, and this is sure to be run at a red hot pace, because there's 2 or 3 horses in here who simply need the lead. Medina Spirit needs the lead. Nixgo needs the lead. It's going to be run really honestly. And I think Essential Quality is likely to have the perfect setup. I really would love to see Mishrif run in the race as well in the Breeders' Cup Classic. I think the way he handled the dirt in Saudi Arabia makes me think he should be in the mile and a quarter dirt race, even if they are subtly different surfaces.
You mentioned Saudi Arabia. Would the Saudi Cup be the most exotic place you've been to broadcast a race meeting? Or where is it? Where's the most exotic place?
I haven't been anywhere all that exotic, to be honest, Ben. I mean, I've been to a lot of tracks in the States and Hong Kong, and a lot of tracks in the Middle East. Yeah, I've still never been to Australia. So yeah, this is a major omission. I think, but for COVID, I might have finally got myself down to see you guys. But the Saudi Cup is certainly an interesting addition to the global calendar. Not everyone has sort of embraced it, but having been to the first 2 editions, you couldn't say it hasn't produced a seriously high class race both years. And I always dream about a top class European horse and a top class American horse locking horns and doing battle. It sort of takes me back to the early days of the Dubai World Cup, when you had Silver Charm and Swain and great battles like that. And to be able to see that, I thought this was a thing of the past and it would never happen again. And to see it happen again last year with Mishrif and Charlatan was just a great joy for someone who loves international racing. And I think the program of races has been designed creatively. There is, despite what is often said, an authenticity to racing in that region. This racetrack is decades old. The grandstand was built in the mid-1990s. So this is not as though it's a a fixture that's just been dropped in out of nowhere, for all that the prize money injection is clearly designed to promote interest in what's going on there. But I think it has a place on the international stage, and it's found that place quite quickly.
Bahrain is slowly coming in too. Can we see maybe one day Bahrain being like the Saudi Cup?
Well, it'll be interesting, won't it? I mean, there's a lot of investment from Bahrain with the new turf series. I'm going out there 3 times this winter to cover racing for them. Sheikh Issa, who has got a lot of investment now in racehorses around the world, is absolutely passionate about horse racing. You know, I think he's been following the game for years, but I think his love of the sport really was taken to another level when he was a student here in the UK at Dartmouth, and would nick off to go racing at Exeter, jumping on his days off. And I think he absolutely is immersed in it. And that collaboration between Bahrain, Dubai, and Saudi Arabia is set to get stronger. And it'll be interesting to see the effect that has on the contribution of that region as a whole to racing around the world. Significant Middle Eastern potentates who we've lost this year: Khalid Abdullah, Sheikh Hamdan Al Maktoum. We know the Shadwell operation is coming right down. They'll only have 70 or 80 horses in training worldwide next year, and we know none in Australia or the Southern Hemisphere. Juddmonte, they're carrying on, but it's slightly remodeled, more commercial emphasis. So fresh investment is always needed and very welcome.
And as a broadcaster, Nick, what kind of preparation do you have to do? Because especially if you're covering race meetings that aren't your bread and butter in the UK, the form can be a bit hard to read sometimes, can't it?
Yeah, Ben. Well, that's why I quite enjoy. Yeah, I really enjoyed chatting to you and just talking to people all over the world, because it just gets your head in the right space. You know, just if you sort of too narrow focused, then you're going from a standing start. I mean, I'm doing this daily podcast. I'm sort of tuned into lots of different stations, if you like, every day. And that helps me. That helps me because suddenly if somebody said to me, what do you think about Zaki running in the Cox Plate this weekend? I don't have to go, oh my God, who's Zaki? What's the Cox Plate?
Yeah.
And hopefully racing is becoming a bit more international as well.
What kind of an Australian influence is there over in the UK? Obviously, you've got the likes of a Jane Chappell-Hyam. Is there any other Aussies over there that are training or involved in other ways in racing over there?
Well, Jamie, it's interesting you mentioned Jane, because she's had an amazing year. Group 1 winner the other day, and just in the last couple of days at Newmarket, she's unleashed 2 really exciting 2-year-olds who could be classic prospects for next year. I mean, you're always going to get Australians in the country and out of the country. You know, from the days of Ron Hutchinson and Scobie Breesley and through to Kerrin McEvoy. I remember riding so well here in the mid-noughties. James McDonald's had a stint over here as well. So he's a Kiwi, isn't he?
Yes, but we count him as our own. His partner's Aussie former jockey Caitlin Mallion. So
that's fine. He's counting as Aussie for the purposes of this conversation. So I love the fact that there's always been significant Australian influences here, and in many respects, I think the biggest Australian influence here in the UK now is Gay Waterhouse, because virtually every young trainer has been with her, has spent time in her stable. Every prominent bloodstock agent you talk to, every young trainer who's doing well, someone who's going places, you get them on the show. Well, how did you start? Well, then I went to Gay Waterhouse for a year. And you say, what did you learn? And they roll their eyes and raise their eyebrows, and you sort of know that this has been a formative and extremely hard branded experience. So I would say of all existing Australians, licensed Australians, she has had the most significant influence over racing in the UK.
Case in point with Annabelle Neesham, one of the first things Annabelle did when she came to Australia was she spent a fair bit of time with Gay, and she has said publicly on the record that the grounding she had with Gay has helped her in her training career so far.
Yeah, I love talking to Annabelle. Just she only had the license 5 minutes, and she got a runner in the slipper, and I rang her up for the pod. And I didn't really know her from back here at all, though we have a couple of good mutual friends. I think the journey she's been on has been nothing short of remarkable, because she wasn't really a racing girl, particularly when she was in England, and she's come such a long way in such a short space of time. and she's clearly, extremely smart, very talented, and very personable as well. And I think Australia evidently really suits her.
Do you currently have any ownership shares or breeding interests yourself? Just even little tiny ones?
Yeah, I've always got something on the go, Ben. I have my one little broodmare who was pretty inexpensive, and she's had one winner from 2 runners so far. The other one will win. Neither of them are of any great distinction. So hopefully within a couple of months, she'll be 2 winners from 2 runners. And she's got the dubious distinction of having a bumper horse with the great Willie Mullins.
Yep.
And a sort of putative 5 furlong two-year-old for next year at the same time. So goodness only knows what I'm trying to breed. But anyway, I'm living the dream that maybe she'll breed something all right. And for years and years now, I've had a leg in a horse or two with John Quinn, who's an excellent operator. He can train winners under both codes, several Royal Ascot winners and Cheltenham winners. And the horse we've got at the moment, he's just a fair horse. He's probably got more ability than he's consented to show, to be honest.
And you may know this guy. Actually, a couple of episodes ago, I had Michael Felgate on. Michael Felgate is going to be hosting the Channel 10 coverage of the Melbourne Cup here in Australia. It's happened to him before. Has it happened to you? When you've been broadcasting, has a horse that you own been running at the same time? And have you had to maintain composure? Because it's happened to Michael before.
Yeah, I mean, years ago, to be honest, I was very lucky when I was very young. The first horse I had in partnership with John, it was just 3 of us who owned him, and so I had a leg in him. My friend had half of him, and John had the other leg. And he was a horse we bought from Tats Book One for very little money. One of those that's a nice pedigree, nice looking horse, but he's just way too backward. And we did actually manage to run him twice as a 2-year-old, which was amazing. But he was never going to be a superstar. But he was a very smart stayer, and he won at the York Ebor Festival. I wasn't there because I came home because one of my daughters was being born. But I was there countless times when he finished second at York when I was broadcasting, and that was quite agonizing. A couple of times he hit the front and then got nabbed in the shadow of the post, and that was quite hard to maintain my composure. They did catch me once. He won at Nottingham. The first race he won at Nottingham, I was down the other end at Newbury, and they caught me on camera going, right, nowadays, everyone loves it, catching TV presenters. I mean, it's kind of a thing. I don't know, 15 years ago, being caught off guard wasn't revered quite as much, was it, as it is now? I did a piece for the Thoroughbred Racing Commentary about this the other day, and I said, the thing is, everyone knows so much about your life. And I think COVID's only fanned those flames, because it's like now you're seeing me sitting here in my study, and it's like everyone seems to have a little window into your world as well as seeing you on the TV. It's not just that that sort of sense of distance has been broken down, which it's not a bad thing. It's just different.
And one of the reasons why I think everyone knows more about each other is we've got social media now, but social media has been great for racing. And one guy I've recently come across, even though he's probably a bit of a polarizing figure, you may know of him, Stephen Power, for example, Blogsy, as we all call him. That kind of content, it's great. And I think it sort of normalizes and gives an insight into big race days and stuff you probably wouldn't usually get. And I think social media now is a great tool to try and attract younger people all over the world to racing.
Oh, it's completely changed the way we all work. There's no doubt about that. I mean, I mean, sometimes you curse it, but most of the time you couldn't do without it. Yeah. You just couldn't. I mean, you couldn't do half the stuff I'm doing without the ability to promote it through social channels. It keeps me up to speed, particularly with what's going on internationally. It's brought the world closer together. I love seeing the clips from racing.com when I get up in the morning. There's always going to be something great with their social media. Same in the States with TVG, and you're always seeing something that you otherwise would have missed.
And away from racing and racing media, what does Nick like to do in his spare time?
Well, I haven't got any spare time at the moment, Ben. That's the problem. As you've found to your cost over the last few weeks. But as you've seen, I've got my 3 girls back here on half term at the moment. Unlike you, I've talked to Richo about this quite a bit, because I speak to him, and he's been homeschooling for about 2 years, as far as I can tell. And he said he's just, well, if he had any hair, he'd be tearing it out. But mine have been back for a while now, but they're back here on half term at the moment. But I got an 11-year-old, 7-year-old, and a 3-year-old. My wife works pretty much, well, nearly full time as well. She's a singing teacher. It's a very musical household. I'm the only one that's not really got very much ability in that regard. So they pretty much keep me busy at the moment. I'd love to go off and do something a bit more recreational. During COVID, I did attempt to get fit. I've let it go a bit now, but I was running and quite enjoying it. So you might have spurred me on. Maybe I'll go for a run today while I've got a couple of hours off. And I want to watch more cricket as well, which is something that I always used to do a lot of. And I'd always get to Lord's 3 or 4 times in a year, the Oval a couple of times in a year. But it's been a struggle the last few summers just to get a moment to sit and enjoy that, really. But I'll make you a little bit jealous that I was there. I was there at the last day of the 2005 and 2009 Ashes series.
No.
Actually, you're not going to be jealous of that at all, are you?
So interesting then. So a little bit of a plug for your podcast that you're doing then. Everyone here in Australia, when they are going for their walks or their runs, they just look it up on Spotify and they can listen to it, running and walking. Yeah,
it's everywhere. Spotify, iTunes, so Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts. It's on all the RSS feeds, so it's easy enough to find.
And one last one has been Sheikh Farhad jumping to the defence of Oisin Murphy for the incident that's happened recently and saying that he needs to be left alone and the tabloid media have attacked him too much. What's actually happening with that over there? What happened for those of us that don't know?
What happened was that Oisin failed a breath test. Jockeys get breathalyzed sometimes on a random basis. Sometimes it's intelligence led. We don't know whether it was one or the other. Either way, he failed a breathalyzer before he was due to ride at Newmarket Friday, 2 Fridays ago.
Yep.
First day of Future Champions meeting. He blew above the riding threshold, below the driving threshold. So he'd basically been out on a big night the night before. Rumours started doing the rounds that he'd been involved in an altercation in a big pub in Newmarket. Those rumours sort of swirled around for a few days, and the story gathered some steam. And then it came out in the Sun and the Daily Mail on Champions Day, which is, of course, the day that is sponsored by Kipco, which is the company that Sheikh Farhad is a huge part of with his brothers. And they have been the sort of major accelerants and instigators behind Kipco British Champions Day. And it came out that Oisin had been involved in an altercation with a bloodstock agent in the pub, and that was the night before he tested positive, etc. So it was a story. He was being crowned champion jockey on the same day. Sheikh Farhad went on ITV, the national broadcaster for horse racing, and questioned by their lead presenter, Ed Chamberlain, who said to him, well, hang on, what about your jockey here? Because Oisin has got a retainer with Sheikh Farhad's Qatar racing operation. And Sheikh Farhad rather reared up at this and said, leave it alone now. Take a walk in this guy's shoes. And no one reads the tabloids. And I think it's generally received wisdom that whilst people could understand his frustration, because here was a day that he was sponsoring and he was being asked about Oisin Murphy, which he probably didn't want to talk about particularly, he did need to recognise that it was A, an issue, B, people do read the tabloids, whether you like it or not, they do. Millions of people read them. And C, he had a personal connection with him. So it was a perfectly reasonable question. I understand his sort of frustration, that it was uncomfortable. But, I think if he'd had his time again, he'd have probably paused, breathed, and considered a more sort of conciliatory response to the situation. I'm not going to start moralizing about Oisin because everyone's had their say on that, to be honest.
Nick Luck, thanks for joining me. Hopefully we'll see you down here for the Melbourne Cup or other spring carnival races sometime soon.
All right, Ben, great to talk to you.
Thank you.